Winter gets to be quite long where I live, so I stay busy by tinkering. I bought a surprise for us. While I'm unboxing this little gem, remember to hit the like and subscribe button. It really helps Zach out. Alright, let's see what we have here. Today, we have a purple Nintendo GameCube that I purchased off of eBay for parts or repair. It has been mummified in Galaxy Space Tape, but there's a reason I theorize this could be a good thing. Depending on how long the tape has been on the cube, I was hoping that it would have protected the shell over the years to prevent discoloration and damage to the plastic. I don't know, I guess we'll just have to see. Firstly, I wanted to see what it was doing to earn the privilege of being in the for parts or repairs section of eBay. As you can see, the GameCube is covered in tape residue, so much so that the tray and the buttons are mostly stuck in place. I stuck a power supply and the digital out adapter into the back of the console. After powering the unit on, I was greeted up by the boot sequence of the cube. Well, that's a good start. A controller was plugged into player 1 where I was pleasantly surprised to find out that all the inputs for the controller worked. However, after sticking a game into the disk drive, as promised, on top of the console and the listing itself, it did not read the disk. You just never know with these things. Here you'll see me position the disk forward, and the reason for this is to see if the disk even spins. You can't hear this yourself, but in this moment I do hear the laser moving back and forth. But upon opening the disk tray again, you can see the disk did not spin. Down to the shop we go! So normally, the main shell comes apart in two pieces after unscrewing the 4 game bit screws on the bottom of the console. We, on the other hand, have the extra step of peeling Galaxy duct tape from the seam and from the screw holes. After removing the bottom compartment covers, I decided to use a hot air gun to heat up the tape to loosen the old adhesive. And don't get me wrong, it worked wonders. At the cost of filling up the shop with smells of, I don't know, old mildewy basement, maybe mixed with a hint of regret. The 4 screws came out of the bottom easily and gave me that satisfying pop feeling when the console has never been opened before. The top half was successfully removed, revealing the internals of the cube. The back faceplate slides out like this, and the front faceplate does the same, with the exception of the ribbon cable that's easily pulled out of its slot. First comes the cooling fan that was held in by the 2 JIS screws. The fan's power cord is easily popped out, so the assembly could be removed. The 12 screws around the top portion, the optical drive assembly, came out, as did the 4 smaller screws where the memory card ports are. It took a little finesse, but the full drive assembly lifted up, revealing the motherboard. A lot of optical drives that fail over time require just a little adjustment to the voltage going to the controller board. I believed to have spotted that exact board under the shielding held on by the 4 screws you see me removing right here. I immediately spotted the potentiometer that I was looking for. A quick inspection of the board under the microscope shows no abnormalities. Again, everything looked really quite good. The multimeter was pulled out so that I could get a baseline reading. Measuring a potentiometer is measuring resistance, so adjusting it is backwards from what most people think. A lower value means less resistance, meaning a higher voltage, and vice versa is also true. I'm theorizing that the laser in the motors would have worn out just a little bit over the years and will require just a little more juice, so we'll be aiming for a little lower of a value. Before we touch anything, let's find out what the factory norms for this particular model's POT. The pot, potentiometer, it's all the same thing. I have a DOL001 model, so the value that I'm looking for is between 450 and 600 ohms. The standard resistance for a DOL101 model is 150 to 250 ohms. From the factory, it seems this particular model is set to 387 ohms. Apparently, the range is wider than specified. To test the results, you'll see me insert the assembly on top of the motherboard and turn it on. I increased the resistance all the way up to 450 ohms or so and slowly decreased the resistance by about 10 ohms at a time until... The initial reading on the pot for this event was 354 ohms, and I'm going to want this at the highest resistance possible while still working reliably. The cube stops working around 370 ohms, which gives me a good range to work with. Tweaking it a single ohm at a time gives me the final result of 361 ohms, in which it works every single time. Seems we've brought this old girl back to life. The tape was removed from the rest of the unit so that I could lightly reassemble it and invite my brother over for some heavy James Bond Nightfire multiplayer action. The GameCube performed beautifully for hours on end. Consider me impressed. I disassembled the unit back down to the motherboard and cleaned it up with a soft bristle brush to remove the larger dust particles. The 6 screws holding the heatsink down were removed with a screwdriver and a heat gun used to apply a little heat. I hoped that this would help loosen the adhesive holding the thermal pads together. With a little wiggling, the heatsink released, revealing the rest of the motherboard. After scraping off the remaining thermal pads and cleaning it up with some IPA, it was time to focus my late-night energy on removing the adhesive residue all over the outside shell. The rest of the outer shell assembly was disassembled so that a product called Goo Gone could be applied with a brush. It took a little elbow grease, but I did in fact remove all the residue. It was now time to head up to the kitchen to give this dirty shell a long overdue bath. All the parts were then squeaky clean, so I quickly partially reassembled the top shell before I forgot how. With the now clean parts, the bottom half of the GameCube was reassembled up to the motherboard so that we could move on to Picoboot. Using plenty of flux and pre-tinning my sights, the blue wire is carefully soldered to leg number 5 of this chip right here. A yellow wire is soldered to leg number 9 of the same chip. The black wire is stripped on the end with just a little extra length to source our ground site. With the extra length of the wire, this site and this site are bridged together. The green wire goes here, and the red wire goes here. Like a good Zach, the thermal pads were replaced at this time with the appropriate sizes shown here on this diagram so that the 6 screws holding it could be screwed back down in this beautiful star pattern. The 4 screws got reinstalled into the top half of the shielding, securing the optical drive assembly. Let's quickly install the blue retro board. Thank you to the guys over there at Laser Bear Industries. I'm not sponsored by them, I just like what they do in their products. After unscrewing the 2 screws holding the board on the back of the front cover, the included antenna I placed right here. The replacement board is screwed into the same 2 screw holes as before. After the antenna is popped into place here, we can move on. We'll revisit part 2 of this later. I installed the latest version of Swiss to an SD card and installed Picoboot to the Pi Pico. Let's get soldering. For my particular setup, I start with the red wire, which is soldered to the bottom of the Pico on pad 3V3. Our black ground wire gets soldered to the same side we were just working on pad ground. Yellow bridges GP6 and 7 together, blue goes to GP4, and green goes to GP5. After cleaning up our working area with a little IPA, the board gets a dab of hot glue and stuck right here on the front of the optical drive assembly with the micro USB facing outward. The Pico cords get nicely wrapped and tucked in this convenient little pocket right here so that reassembly can begin. The screws were reinstalled around the console. After the ribbon cable was reinserted, the blue retro setup got slid into the front where the original assembly was. The power input is plugged from the power board into the bottom right of the blue retro board here, while this power outlet plugs back up in here to complete the circuit. The rest of the GameCube reassembly is a straightforward reverse of how it was taken apart. The only things of note was that the top GameCube jewel was buffed with some plastic polish to give it this beautiful shine, and the SD2 SP2 assembly was slid together and placed into the appropriate port that was loaded with the SD card from earlier. Let's plug it in, connect a Bluetooth controller, test it out. All the functionality works great. This thing looks good, works wonderfully. I'm very happy with how this thing turned out. Here's a little video I put together of how it looks from all sides. While I start up a fresh save file on Wind Waker, I just want to thank you guys for hanging out with me in some of my hobbies. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next one.